Warped Tour is coming to an end in 2018. This was announced in a recent interview with Kevin Lyman, the founder of the tour, and a few people came to me asking if I was going to make a video on this. And I told all of them that I wasn't going to because at first I didn't really have any thoughts on the matter outside of...
No, sir, I didn't like it.
Personally, I was never a big summer festival guy. I've only ever been to 2 Warped Tours in my life. But the end of these kinds of things is a big loss, especially for upcoming bands who are kind of at the verge and just need that big festival push to really break them to the next level. But you know, things come to an end, stuff changes, and nothing lasts forever. But the real reason I'm making this video is that in that interview in which people found out that Warped Tour is coming to an end, Kevin Lyman said one thing that I think is really important and it's being overlooked. I think that for anybody who read that and they're a musician, whether it be a metal, punk, or even a hip-hop or anything, because what he said has ramifications for absolutely anybody who plays live music. So let's take a look at what he said in the interview. He was asked, in a 2015 interview, you floated the idea of imposing an age limit on Warped musicians and crew. Do you think having a younger crowd than most festivals led to some behavioral issues? And I believe the interviewer is making reference to some of the sexual misconduct scandals that have been coming out recently. And here's Kevin's response. Well, there were those, and then to be honest, this past summer the 14 to 17-year-olds disappeared. I kept thinking, is it the Warped Tour? Is it the bands I booked? And now honestly, this past summer was one of the only Warped Tours I attended, and going into it I felt like it would have been an older crowd based on the bands they booked. You know, bands like Gwar, The Acacia Strain, Hatebreed, I think Goldfinger was on a few dates. I imagine that all of these bands have age demographics that are much older than 14 to 17. But that's not to say though that there weren't bands on the tour that should have been drawing those demographics, which is pretty much what he goes on to say. Well no, I booked all the bands that should have become the next Sleeping with Sirens or Pierce the Veil. I booked Neck Deep and Knocked Loose and I Prevail and Beartooth, all doing really well as bands. But when our demo jumped, our average age jumped almost 3 years last year, up to 19. So then you're sitting there at night on the bus going, where are the kids? So at first I read that and I'm thinking, well, that's not that big of a deal, that just is something that specifically pertains to Warped Tour. But what he goes on to say next is something that was really like an oh shit moment to me as a musician. This year, The Atlantic ran a great story wondering if kids just don't want to go out. You talk to people across the country and they say, yeah, my kids don't want to go out anymore, they just stay in their room. They just want to stay in their room and they want to watch Netflix. So I think as an industry, we're going to be facing some big challenges, and then some people go, well, kids are into hip-hop right now, and I go, well, the younger end of that is not going to shows. But if we don't get kids out of their rooms and going to shows, they'll turn into 18 to 21-year-olds soon, and if you don't have the DNA of going to concerts by then, it just doesn't become a part of your lifestyle. Now granted, that is just one man's view of ideas discussed in a single article, but I do think that that one particular guy, being who he is, may have a greater insight into this than most of us. And if he's right about it, that these younger showgoers in the 14 to 17-year-old range, that they're just simply not going to shows anymore because they don't want to go to shows anymore, that could mean that live music as we know it is fucking doomed. That's kind of the cycle that the music scene goes through. You get these 14 to 17-year-olds start going out to shows, they get older, come up with a bunch of different bands, then at a certain point, real life takes over, they can't go to shows like they used to, but that's okay because there's a new crop of 14 to 17-year-olds to replenish the vitality of the scene, and it just goes on and on like that forever. Until you wind up at this point now, I think he's totally right that if going out to shows isn't something that's a part of your lifestyle, by the time you reach that age, it's not something you're generally gonna start doing at an older age. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but as a general rule, it probably holds. And coming up as a musician in New York, I feel like I've always experienced this sort of competition with outside forces. In New York, probably more so than other places, there's an abundance of other things you can be doing besides going to a show. On any given night that you're playing a show, there's thousands of other shows you could potentially attend. There's bars, restaurants, and other places have these, but not in the pure saturation that we have it. And even, you can go to places, there's a million things you can do that don't cost you any money, that you can just do outside or wherever the hell. I remember being on tour and you would hit these random towns that would have amazing scenes and shows would just pack out, and you wouldn't think there would even be that many people there to go to a show, but you would ask them and it would be like, hey, like, what else are we gonna do here? Like, it's either go to a show or stay home and do nothing. And I feel like those kinds of scenes are gonna be hit the hardest by this, because now they're competing with, I can go to a show or I can stay home and not do nothing. I can have anything I fucking want at the tip of my fingertips right now. Now, the new generation coming up, like, this is the first generation to have had that their entire life, so we really can't say anything about what's cyclical or about how things used to be or how things replenish, because we don't know what's going to happen now. I'm sure there's always going to be people of any age who want to go to a live show just because it's a totally different experience from sitting at home and listening to music, but will it be enough to make it financially viable, especially for the smaller bands who already are kind of at the borderline of financial ruin every time they go on a tour? And if all genres are being affected across the board by this, the bigger hip-hop artists, they're not going to be affected to the degree that, you know, a small hardcore band that can already expect like maybe like 20 people tops at a show. If now half of those people would rather watch Netflix, then they can't really tour anymore. And I guess this is the part where I would make some kind of prediction about what the future holds because of this, and all I can really think is maybe we're going to see more of a rise of bands who are really only internet bands and don't tour until maybe they break past a certain level. Like, this may be the end of little tiny tours. And here's the thing, I'm sure the motivation for baby bands to pile into a van and play to like 2 kids in every town, I feel like that will never go away. But if promoters and venues see that they're never ever 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 making money on these kinds of things, those opportunities might just start to vanish. And I know I have a lot of people who watch this channel that are involved in music, that tour, that go to shows, so I'm really curious about what you think. If you're in that younger 14 to 17-year-old age range, do you go to shows? If you're in a band that tours, or if you go out to shows, have you personally been seeing the age demographic shift older? Anyway, until next time, everybody get fucked.